You are listening to No PC Allowed, aka No Political Correctness Allowed, and I am Mac Iverson. When I heard of Charlie Kirk's assassination, I was driving. I pulled over and immediately started sobbing like a baby. With face in hands, I blubbered something like, "Please God, no, not Charlie. What will we do without him?" What will we do without him is a very good question. Many panty waists are saying, "No more large events." These are cowards. Charlie is turning over in his grave already. It's time to slam the accelerator to the floor on what the fake news complex has labeled divisive rhetoric. But there was nothing really divisive about Charlie. He was a uniter in the grandest sense of the word. You cannot unite without a uniting vision. And loser lefties will always act like petulant children in reaction to truth and goodness. Erica Kirk knows about the very organized group effort to bring down her husband and America. She said, "The evil doers who took Charlie's life have no idea what they have done. If they thought my husband's mission was powerful before, they have no idea what they have just unleashed. Not just across this country, but in me. They have no idea the fire they've lit inside this wife. The cries of this widow will echo around the world like a battle cry. The movement my husband built will not die. I refuse to let that happen. It will grow stronger, bolder, louder, greater than ever." What a woman. What a wife. What a mother. Wow. What a patriot. Charlie was the rarest of men. He was a saint, a martyr for freedom of speech. The ones who murdered him in cold blood were haters of free speech. Notice I made that plural, just like Mrs. Kirk. In a very deep and real sense, it was a mob hit. Anyone who listens to No PC Allowed already knows this. Now, someone is bound to say, "Now just hold your horses there, cowboy. How do you know it's a mob hit? Only one guy pulled the trigger." And if you look at this superficially, then of course that appears to be true. But on this podcast, No PC Allowed, we look at everything with more depth. When I say mob hit, I mean organized crime, which in the 21st century has global connections. This is obvious, with so many players vying for the top spot of global power and money, having tremendous sway over 8.2 billion people. Of course, there will be a vicious and orchestrated reaction to any threat, real or perceived, to those business interests. Many of my listeners are aware of the World Economic Forum, which is a fancy name for the global organized crime syndicate based mostly out of Switzerland, specifically Geneva and Davos. Charlie Kirk stood directly opposed to just about all their business interests. "Whoa again there, cowboy. Business has always been business. Business ain't illegal." Ordinarily, this would be true. Even Charlie Kirk said that just because we disagree with George Soros doesn't mean that we can imprison him for his agenda. But this was the great missing link in Charlie's otherwise profoundly effective messaging. Charlie had a bottom-up approach to changing the world. This strategy can be extremely effective, but only over a long period of time. He used a direct frontal assault with his Prove Me Wrong tours of college campuses, which is absolutely necessary because the deep state uses mostly clandestine means and dishonesty to advance their goals. The best strategy against dishonesty and trickery is unabashed honesty and direct confrontational assaults against all the deep state lies based on billionaire propaganda. In other words, shine a light in the dark and watch the woke cockroaches scatter. But Charlie was about grassroots, not attacking the kingmakers at the top so much, who never had to get their hands dirty and who comfortably control all the woke lemmings at the bottom of their pyramid scam structure, by funding the leftist lunatics on college campuses with their soft money donations or bribes. But Charlie mostly ignored the top-down strategy of the deep state, and this was his fatal flaw. That's because the deep state operates from the top down, not the bottom up. The deep state does not need to go from bottom to top because the top has already been conquered. Charlie, though not entirely, mostly ignored the top movers and shakers, the billionaires of this world. This gap in his understanding, or his fatal flaw, is what led to his assassination. Because think about it. If he had talked about the world's power brokers in the same terms that I have been doing for almost 3 years now, then he would have been shining a white-hot spotlight upon the globalized organized crime syndicate, but he didn't. Therefore, the mafia is still, several days now after his assassination, not even being talked about as the guilty player in Kirk's murder. There is not any grand-scale discussion that it actually deserves being discussed anywhere, even in conservative corporate media. No one's talking about it because the leader of the conservative youth movement in America was not talking about it with the major focus that it deserved. He was focused mostly upon the end byproduct of the mafia's influence. That byproduct being primarily America's youth being brainwashed through education or the lack thereof movies, television, music, and popular culture in general. Had Kirk pointed out these criminals diligently every single day, then they would be under a global magnifying glass starting today. But because he did not, no one in Switzerland is sweating. As a cynic, I could say that Charlie Kirk's more enduring legacy was that he had the opportunity to focus the blame upon these global mafia dons like a laser beam, but he chose not to, at least not fully, with daily exposure to the full breadth of their corrupt influence. The fact that this murder was a mob hit is undeniable. I don't care if it was done by just one lone nut. The propaganda that brainwashed this loser was a concerted group effort. The mafia, historically speaking, has always sought to control the influencers of their day. Today, that means the media such as MSNBC, CNN, even Fox News, and so on. And they have done so with radical success. All you have to do is look at how divided not just America, but the entire world is between left and right. But politics is only the shiny object dangling in front of simpletons. I'm not saying that Charlie Kirk was a simpleton, certainly not. He did something extremely important and something that had never been done before, motivating grassroots activity on such a massive scale. He is largely responsible for Trump's victory last year, but the mafia kingmakers, just like the mobsters of old, have bought the newspapers, so to speak. Just like Al Capone and many other successful 20th century crooks, they bribed and bought corporate influencers. This bribery also happened with COVID and Big Pharma, as it also happened with feeding the climate change hysteria and churning it into the industrial complex tumor that it is now. So these deep state actors are able to, with lightning speed, circumvent and saturate the entire world from the top down. They never needed to capture the top because they are the top. That is the only reason why the deep state seems to hold all the cards against all of us. In other words, Charlie Kirk was focused more on the effects rather than the cause of the corruption of America's youth that the power brokers have already greatly influenced for generations, but not on the power brokers themselves. This was a massive strategical error of Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA. Please, dear listener, remember this. You may think a few days or a week or two after this horrible, evil murder that the momentum will shift decidedly in our favor. And while there are many wonderful, talented leaders on our side, remember, there was only one George Washington. There was only one Abraham Lincoln. And there is only one Donald Trump. So, too, know that there was only one Charlie Kirk, and there will always only be just one Charlie Kirk. What do I mean by this exactly? It means don't hold your breath that Charlie Kirk will automatically transmogrify into 5, 10, 15, 20, 50, or even just one more Charlie Kirk, simply because he was martyred in a horrible murder. Charlie Kirk was the cream that rose to the top simply because there are so many cowards on planet Earth. Charlie was a man of deep faith and therefore deep courage. He knew his final destination would be with Jesus in heaven. He knew that. How many people have that same level of deep-rooted faith? Relatively speaking, very few. We know this because so few display that level of courage on such a vast public scale. He was in the public square every day with his faith and courage. Charlie was also in the people business. Everything he stood for was about people and loving people. The greatest command of the Bible is to first love God and then love people. If we genuinely love people, then why don't we go out of our way to apply the obvious principles of the Bible and use them to love and protect people? Charlie Kirk understood this completely. In fact, he was a genius at it, and that made him a martyred saint. But do not think for one moment that our success is guaranteed. The loss of Charlie Kirk is tremendous. He was a man of rarefied, pure, godlike character. If Kirk had focused upon the actual kingmakers in the global mafia, the full ramifications of their sphere of influence, which is near total, and he had actually named their names every single day, like George and Alex Soros, Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates from the Gates of Hell, and many others. Had Charlie mentioned their names with extreme consistency, like I do every single episode on this podcast, No PC Allowed, and most important, if Charlie had actually called them the Mafia, and had done so again consistently, then that spotlight would become like a detective's heat lamp shining down hard on all the guilty players, making them sweat profusely. Because let me tell you something about human nature. There is such a thing known as guilt, and guilt can be extremely powerful. Just ask any Jew mother. Naming names and giving them the horrible moniker of the Mafia will, over time, do the trick. But as Christians, we don't want to impugn our leaders because of Romans 13:1. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. And as conservatives, We don't want to impugn businessmen either, because it makes us sound too much like liberals who may hate the wealthy and capitalism. This creates a problem, a schism. It gives us a collective mental block to our becoming more successful. Conservatives are more nuanced than liberals, which just means that we actually think about positions, not just emote them, like that airhead loser who murdered Mr. Kirk. To find our bearings and our success, we must come to terms with some very uncomfortable truths. Number one, we are not fully in control of our own destinies, not as long as the deep state mafia, which is very real, holds power over our lives. And number two, we have far, far, far more personal power than most of us are willing to admit to ourselves, because it puts the ball in our court when we do not want the pressure of having to perform. Both points are iron that sharpens iron, giving us that sharp cutting edge to tear out of our mostly self-imposed limitations. Let's look closer at those who have Charlie Kirk's blood on their hands. George Soros helped to inventory property seized from Jews by the Nazis during World War II. Curiously enough, ChatGPT suddenly loses its calm, objective composure over this issue because AI needs to protect its boy, George Soros. Even a fair, objective question about his role regarding only what he did during World War II is met with ChatGPT getting its panties scrunched into a bunch, saying that the very question is, and I quote, anti-Semitic trope. Does this sound like impartiality to you? Those very guilty-sounding words sound like something old paranoid George has uttered many times. In fact, almost every single time he has been criticized for anything, his defense is almost always a glaring fallacy. He offers nothing but ad hominem attacks on anyone who dares to criticize him for anything at all on any topic. His MO is to attack the character of his critic, not to address the actual accusation. Every single criticism is almost always, he claims, because all of his critics hate Jews. Never mind that almost every single policy he supports is fundamentally anti-Israel. Soros has also publicly stated that he worries about maintaining his own sanity, boldly stating that insanity runs in his family. Considering that with his obvious inability to think clearly, and that is what I call no shit Sherlock. Soros and his proxies have directly and indirectly funded the creation of ChatGPT to make certain his bias never fades. To protect Soros's reputation, but most important to protect his business and ideological interests. Regarding the WEF's Klaus Schwab, another globalist mobster, his father was a major business partner to the Nazis. The nut doesn't fall far from the tree. These represent just a few of the globalist mobster monsters who are directly or, if you insist, indirectly responsible for Charlie Kirk's murder. Always remember, very important, China is also behind all of this. Their blood-stained fingers pulled that trigger as well. I have hammered this wildly profound and yet severely underrated truth over and over and over and over again on this podcast for nearly 3 years now. The global mafia is real, and if it can influence just one lone nut with a gun to kill Charlie Kirk, and to feel good about that because he feels like he's killing a clone of Hitler, that influence has bought and paid for the incredible bias that is found throughout the fake news industrial complex. We call it fake news because those opinions on the news have been paid for. Well, who pays for them? The ones who can afford to buy them. The criminals who are looking to make money hand over fist and gain as much power as humanly possible. The ones with the God complexes, the George Soroses of the world. If Charlie Kirk had focused laser beam attention on them, they would never come after him because of his high profile and because Charlie's hyper-focused attention upon them would have exposed them. Of course, it could mean that the decades-old propaganda would have influenced this loser to shoot him anyway, but at least all the attention would have been there on specific billionaires, on the ones responsible for the brainwashing. And to this day, it is not, and it is not looking good for the future. Public awareness on the global mafia is not there. I don't hear enough people calling them that except me. Certainly no one in corporate media hammers this like I do. Charlie Kirk didn't. I'm one of only a relative tiny number of influencers on planet Earth, as far as I know, who even has the guts to talk about this stuff. I know I'm tooting my own horn, but sometimes I should do it. We have been shadow banned. We used to have millions of weekly views. Now we have next to none. Because the global power brokers influence the politicians influence big tech to stifle and censor any opinions that runs counter to the money interests of the mafia. In other words, we must attack the head of the demon. The demon is not on college campuses, only his demon spawn. The demon is on permanent vacation on his billion-dollar yacht. We must go for the demon's jugular vein, not just his bony limbs, which he can shed and regrow like a hydra. If you're going to kill the beast, you need to kill the beast. Figuratively speaking, of course. There's the irony of Kirk's assassination being just one day before Patriots' Day. No longer is it just 9/11. Now it's 9, 10, and 11. And along with January 6th, this date now has profound and permanent meaning for all real Americans. A date which will live in infamy. Now he belongs to the ages. Charlie was murdered because they could not out-debate him. The demon-controlled deep state isn't smart enough to protect even its trillions of dollars of investments with rational arguments. It can only throw money at their investments and throw money at the propaganda force that led to the emotional overreaction of the shooter. The enemy's tactic is to strike the shepherd in hopes that the flock will scatter. Zechariah 13:7. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. I will turn my hand against the little ones. Many of these lost sheep must now become shepherds as a result. Through this profound loss, we must take Charlie's vision far beyond anything even he could have ever imagined. Charlie Kirk deserves this. Notice something very important. Since the murder, there have been no riots that I know of. Why is this? My aunt was killed in a head-on collision many years ago. She was pregnant, and other people died in the car with her. Our family did not sue the drunk driver. We couldn't move forward with it because our family was so completely heartbroken, and we never fully recovered from that heartbreak. This is what we're experiencing now with Kirk's assassination. Our reaction is not politically driven. His murder drives us to our knees, praying to God for strength and wisdom, not to have riots in every city like the left always has, because we have a bigger vision of life than these stooges on the left who are controlled almost entirely by billionaire-moneyed influence. Our side is driven by love and truth. Look at George Floyd, a loser who half deserved what he got simply for being so stupid in life, and his low-life supporters burned America's cities as a result. In stark contrast, a saint like Charlie Kirk is brutally murdered, and his death inspires exactly 0 riots, 0 lootings. Floyd's death inspired socialist reprisals and more bloodshed, and Kirk's death inspired mostly peaceful vigils, prayers, and genuine tears. What can you do, dear listener? You can scream from the hillsides, just like those who refused to allow Spartacus to become a lonely, failed martyr. I am Charlie Kirk. Say it loud, say it proud, over and over again. Make sure the cowardly haters of the world never curtail his vision of transforming America into that shining city on a hill. You've been listening to No PC Allowed. I am Mac Iverson.